The Korean War is often remembered for its stark frontlines, brutal winters, and, honestly, the geopolitical tug-of-war between East and West. What is far less discussed, however, is the quiet struggle of soldiers against the very gear meant to protect them. Modern audiences picture uniforms as standardized, protective, and, well, largely comfortable. Yet in Korea, the difference between old canvas rain gear and the early iterations of synthetic plastics could mean exhaustion, illness, or survival. Many accounts suggest that troops in older, heavy canvas coats often endured harsh conditions more effectively than those issued modern, plasticized rainwear. This is a detail that historians and survivalists alike can overlook. Innovation does not always equal improvement. Before we go further, if you value this kind of nuanced exploration of history, do consider subscribing to History Matters and turning on notifications. This channel is dedicated to digging beneath the surface, uncovering the decisions, experiences, and material realities that shaped 20th century conflicts. The Korean winter made every piece of clothing a matter of life and death. Korea's winters are severe, far more punishing than most Americans and Europeans appreciate. Temperatures could plummet to -20 degrees Celsius or -4 degrees Fahrenheit in the north, combined with biting wind and persistent sleet. Soldiers were constantly wet, whether from snow, rain, or rivers crossed during operations. In this environment, the type of rain gear issued was not a trivial detail. It was a survival tool. Early plasticized raincoats, introduced in the late 1940s and widely issued by the US military in Korea, were lighter and waterproof. At first glance, they seemed a step forward. Soldiers could march without the heavy drag of saturated canvas, and theoretically they stayed dry. But the reality was more complex. Plastic gear trapped sweat and body heat, creating a micro-environment that was wet from the inside, even when it kept rain out. Soldiers engaged in patrols or supply runs quickly discovered that moisture from perspiration could not escape. Canvas, by contrast, absorbed water slowly, but allowed air to circulate. Wet canvas would weigh more and take longer to dry, but it maintained a more stable body temperature and reduced the risk of frostbite or hypothermia during rest periods. In survival terms, breathability often outweighed waterproofing. Lessons from the front line show that material choices were, tactical decisions. Commanders rarely considered these subtleties when ordering uniform changes. The United States Army's transition from canvas to early plastics was driven more by logistics and this whole sense of perceived modernity rather than by direct testing in extreme cold. The lessons, they were learned the hard way. Reports from the 1st Cavalry Division describe units in the Naktong River corridor suffering from exposure-related ailments, even though they had so-called dry rain gear. Infantry officers noted that soldiers wearing canvas overcoats actually maintained higher endurance on long marches because the fabric regulated temperature better, even when it was soaked through. This highlights a critical point that's often overlooked in military history. Material science influences combat effectiveness just as much as strategy does. The choice between canvas and plastic wasn't really about style or convenience. It directly affected operational readiness and, honestly, survival itself. Lessons from Korea influenced later military equipment decisions, including the design of layered cold weather gear and eventually the development of breathable synthetics like Gore-Tex. The historical record shows quite clearly that innovation without field testing can compromise rather than enhance soldier performance. Canvas survived because, frankly, it was adaptable and repairable right there in the field. Another advantage of canvas was its durability and, field serviceability. Korean soldiers and American units alike had to deal with equipment damage in some pretty harsh terrain. Canvas could be patched up with basic sewing kits, which effectively extended the life of a coat for months at a time. Plasticized garments, on the other hand, once torn or punctured, were largely irreparable in the field. This meant that soldiers in cheaper, less repairable synthetic gear faced longer periods without effective protection. In small but meaningful ways, canvas contributed to both morale and tactical resilience. A dry, functioning overcoat allowed soldiers to rest and recover during lulls in combat, which directly affected the next day's operational effectiveness. From a survivalist perspective, this principle is universal. Materials that allow for repair and adaptation are more valuable in extended operations than those optimized only for immediate convenience. Korea, with its mountainous terrain and extreme weather, really provided a laboratory for observing this principle firsthand. Moisture management became a silent battle. Most histories of the Korean War focus on battles and strategic maneuvering, but, moisture management was a daily challenge for every soldier. Frostbite and trench foot were pervasive threats. Commanders learned that issuing lighter waterproof gear without considering breathability could actually make these problems worse. Canvas, by allowing moisture to wick away from the body, reduced prolonged skin exposure to wetness and cold. This created a subtle but critical edge for units operating in mountainous regions or on extended reconnaissance missions. It's worth noting that North Korean and Chinese troops often relied on traditional clothing layered for insulation, frequently including canvas or cotton garments. Their adaptation to Korean winters was a mix of necessity and pragmatism, showing that high-tech solutions aren't always better than historically tested methods. Human physiology and environmental realities often outweigh the theoretical advantages of synthetic materials. The Korean War shaped modern understanding of material science in military gear. The experiences of 1950 to 1953 informed future generations of military designers and survival instructors. After Korea, the United States Army conducted extensive studies comparing breathability, water absorption, and insulation properties of different fabrics. These studies directly influenced later Cold War-era uniforms and eventually civilian outdoor gear. Gore-Tex and other breathable synthetics really owe their conceptual foundation to the hard-learned lessons about canvas versus early plastics. The Korean War showed that soldier effectiveness depends not just on rifles, tanks, or artillery, but on the subtle interplay between human endurance and the materials designed to protect them. This is also a lesson for anyone interested in preparedness or survivalism today. Modern gear often prioritizes ultralight waterproofing over breathability. Understanding the historical context of material performance can inform better choices for outdoor expeditions, long treks, or emergency situations. History in this case is not just a record of battles, it is a manual for applied survival. Canvas taught soldiers patience and adaptation. Perhaps less tangible but equally important, canvas gear forced soldiers to develop adaptive habits. They learned to air out clothing, rotate layers, and improvise shelter to maintain warmth. Soldiers wearing early plasticized raincoats often relied excessively on artificial heat sources or rushed movements, which increased fatigue. Canvas required them to think ahead, manage their energy, and respect environmental conditions. These lessons, strategic patience, anticipation of natural hazards, and resourcefulness, echo far beyond Korea. They reflect the enduring principle that technology alone does not guarantee safety. Human judgment remains central. Remembering the everyday realities completes our understanding of war. When we study conflicts like the Korean War, it's tempting to focus on dramatic offensives, high-level diplomacy, or political consequences. Yet, the daily struggle of a soldier against cold, wet clothing illustrates a different kind of history. The lived experience. Canvas versus plastic rain gear may seem trivial, but it shaped how men endured hardship, preserved their health, and sustained combat effectiveness. These details really teach historians, survivalists, and enthusiasts that innovation must be tempered by context, and that resilience often comes from simplicity and adaptability rather than novelty. By examining these overlooked aspects, we enrich our understanding of 20th century warfare, human endurance, and the subtle choices that influenced outcomes. Remembering the lessons of canvas over plastic is more than an academic exercise. It connects us to the realities faced by those on the front lines and reminds us that history is made not just in grand gestures, but in the quiet, essential struggles of everyday survival. If you found this insight valuable, subscribe to History Matters and share this video. Understanding these nuanced historical truths equips us not only with knowledge of the past, but with practical insights into endurance, material science, and decision-making that remain relevant today.